I have returned.
Okay, the live streaming is set up.
Cool.
Uh, all I gotta do is turn the live stream from private to public, and then YouTube will be able to see it. Looks like we got 7 minutes before it's showtime.
Cool.
And we are all ready.
Fabulous. If I remember correctly, I listened to some of the previous workshops and the live stream has quite a long lag. Am I right?
15 seconds.
Oh, that's nothing. Okay, fine. In my head, I had something much longer than that. That's fine.
Oh, okay.
Well, there's nothing we can do about it, is there? That's just the way it is.
Pretty much.
Fair enough. Well, I won't be offended if you want to run off for the remaining 7 minutes.
No, I think I'd rather stay.
Yeah, you're in place now. Where are you based, Michael?
I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona, United States.
Ah, gosh. You've got a good spread across the states, haven't you?
Yes, yes. Let's see. Yep. Randall is in San Francisco,
Yeah.
as well as Thomas Lau.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Jesse, he's somewhere in the DC area.
Underwater most of the time,
Yeah.
judging by his audio.
Right.
Because Anita was from Texas, isn't she? But she's now in Italy.
Correct. Yeah, she was.
Yeah.
Yeah, Texas is her home, but she's going to school in Italy.
Yeah, I'm impressed. She kept saying her Italian wasn't very good, and I was like, "You could read a PC, you can read the stuff on your laptop in Italian. You must be pretty good."
Yeah, I'd say.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's see. I know we have one. Gabriel, he's in Stockholm, Sweden. Um, Samuel, I think, Slovakia.
Oh wow.
Yeah, he's got a British accent, so I keep on thinking he's like in London or something, but I think he's in, yeah, Slovakia. We've got a couple of the younger newer members. They're in India. There seems to be like a growing number of volunteers from there, which
Yes.
honestly isn't too surprising.
No,
Um,
that's true.
uh, then we've got John Davis. He's in Sydney, Australia.
I love Sydney. Have you got anybody from Iceland yet?
No, we have not.
That's a shame because that would be a really good place to have a retreat.
Oh, absolutely. I've seen the pictures, but
It's awesome. I love Iceland. I actually looked at moving there. I loved it so much. I was actually contemplating going to live there. It's just a really interesting place. Um, well, it was. I don't know what it's like now, but it was really interesting. It's it's very wild. If you like the sort of landscape that's quite desolate and almost sort of prehistoric, Iceland's really, really like raw, and I actually really like that. So I thought it was an amazing place.
oh, nice. All right. Yeah, I think the closest place, like the closest environment I've been to Alaska. So
I'd love to go to Alaska.
oh, it's yeah. If there was job opportunity, I'd sure move there, which there might be. Once I finish my current degree I'm working on.
What are you doing at the moment then? What's your degree?
My degree, well, I just started it. It's in business analytics.
Okay.
I currently have a bachelor's from Arizona State in Earth and Space Exploration.
Oh,
Um,
that's rather cool.
yeah, it, it's a combination of geological sciences and astrophysics.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, but it's not really like um, with what I have, and like since it's not a doctorate, it's not there's not a lot of career opportunities. Um,
No.
yeah, and what I do is I work at Intel in as a manufacturing technician. which is different anyways. So yeah, so my career with my academics and my like what I do, it's kind of all over the place. Nothing's really consistent.
Yeah.
So but what I'd like to do with my business analytics is move out of the factory at Intel and get like a nice desk job. So that's
Yes.
to be like just blunt. That's kind of what I'd like to do.
You'll get there. I mean, to be honest, I'm a firm believer that if you put your mind to stuff, it's amazing what you can do.
Oh yeah.
And if you're dedicated enough, I'm sure you will. And just think you could be sitting in Alaska. That would be seriously cool.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. I worked in South Africa for a bit, and that was actually really nice. I lived and worked over there. Um, and that was really interesting 'cause it's just such a different place.
Oh yeah.
Not that not that the UK is exactly fantastic at the moment. Yeah, we're bad.
Oh yeah.
We're not in a good place. But what can you do?
Yeah, I don't know.
Are they vaccinating? Are they vaccinating where you are at the moment?
They've got them available right now. It's frontline workers,
Yeah.
and yeah. So we're still going through the frontline workers, and starting in I think about 2 weeks, then they'll get to the essential workers, like people who can't work from home. And also starting with, I think, like the elderly who are most susceptible. So we've got it. We've got the vaccine available. They're still working through the primary people right now. And I know my company is going to give them at some point. I'm a little. I just want to make sure that they're a little bit more understanding about the side effects. Like
Yes.
my mother, she's a nurse practitioner, and she's witnessed some side effects from being from from headaches to very high fevers. So I'm just
Oh,
taking a little bit
okay.
of caution with it. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, if I remember correctly, I think there's about four, there might be five now, that are either through or in the pipeline. And the efficacy from one of them is completely different. Most of them are hitting about 95%, but one of them's like 60 odd percent, that's all.
Oh wow.
And that's quite a gap.
COVID.
I don't think you get a choice which one you have. They vaccinated both my parents, and they both had different vaccines, but they weren't given a choice. It was just you have this one.
Oh okay.
Yeah, we shall see. I'm a long way down the list. I think I'm tier 8 of 9.
Oh wow.
Well, I'm pretty old, but I'm not quite old enough.
I see. Let's see. We'll start here in just a bit. I think we'll wait for a few more people to join, and I'll ask Randall if he's okay with introducing you. Otherwise, I can do it.
Either of you, I don't mind. The second slide which gives a really brief bio, but I can skip over that or do it depending. Either
Okay.
way.
All right.
I'm not sure if it's necessary, but if you want, I can make a local recording of this.
Completely up to you. I don't mind either way.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm here, so I might as well. Whatever. It's all good.
It can float around for posterity.
Okay.
I can.
And I just switched the live stream to public, so just because we're at that time, so I think then you can either give it a minute or start whenever you're ready.
Do you want me to start?
Yeah. Okay.
Shall I go? Okay. Right. Hello, everybody. I'm Angela. I'm going to be talking to you about my doctoral thesis, which looks at the fields of whole brain emulation and the creation of a substrate-independent mind. I'm conscious that not all of you know who I am. I'm probably a bit of a blur. So let me just give you a really quick biography. I did my first degree well over 30 years ago, so I am technically a mature student. And I've had a long and very happy career in commercial market research. But in 2018, I went back to uni. I wanted to do a master's for ages, but I just hadn't had the time, I hadn't had the opportunity. So I went back to Nottingham and I did an MSc in psychological research. That was quite a calculated move. Because I've become aware of a centre called Horizon that funded and trained people to do their PhDs. And I wanted to get in there. And I thought it was probably a good step to go and try and get a master's at Nottingham and see if that would help me. Well, it did, and it worked. So I'm currently a second year student at Horizon. Horizon is quite strange. It does a 4-year PhD, which is industry partnered. And it focuses on digital identity, personal data, and data creativity. And this is where we have a slightly strange coincidence, because the Horizon Centre for Doctoral Training is affiliated with Horizon's Digital Economy Research Institute. And one of their senior research fellows is a really lovely guy called Ansgar Kuna. So you can probably join the dots at this point. And it's actually Ansgar who put me in touch with Randall, and hence that's how I got involved with carbon copies, and I'm currently working with them. Okay, so I'm doing a funded PhD, and I'm sure you know that you have to justify that there's a need for your research. I did a literature search fairly early on, and what I found is there was lots written about whole brain emulation and mind uploading, but nobody, with the exception of one team in Helsinki, had actually spoken to the public and tried to understand what their perceptions were or their preconceptions. How did they feel about these kind of concepts? What would it mean to them? The guys in Helsinki are a really nice team. They work under the banner of the morality of intelligent machines. I've got a link on one of the slides. They've done some really interesting work, not just mind uploading, but they do stuff with cobots, etc. But their research is very quantitative. So there's lots of percentages, correlations, factor analysis, etc. And one thing they have found out, which is quite interesting, is that science fiction enthusiasts express a more positive attitude towards technology compared to others. And again, if you want to dig around in that paper, it's in one of the slides at the end. So what they're doing is great, but it doesn't really enable understanding of how the wider public feel about this kind of technology. And so this was basically the gap that I'm looking to fill with my PhD. So this is my current research project. The moment, the working title is Mind Uploading, Whole Brain Emulation, and the Creation of a Substrate-Independent Mind, a roadmap for the individual and society. Those of you who are familiar with this area will know that in 2008, a roadmap towards whole brain emulation came out of the Future of Humanity Institute in Oxford in the UK. So my research is almost tying in with that, in the sense that what I'm looking to do is create or generate a narrative or a journey or a road, if you like, for an individual going along the journey towards mind uploading, and also to look at sort of a a societal impact or societal level. And obviously this does tie into the current work that Carbon Copies are doing. The Roadmap Group, which I'm involved with, are actually currently looking to update the 2008 roadmap. So it all ties in really, really nicely. A little bit of a serendipity, if you like. So I've got two really big questions, I guess. The first is, how do the public respond to the concepts of whole brain emulation and mind uploading? And actually, as importantly, or even more importantly, why do they feel that way? What's shaping their opinions? What's their belief system? What's driven them to have the sort of images in their head that they do? One other thing I should say is defining the public isn't an easy task. In this context, I'm using it to refer to people who aren't involved in research and development, so they're non-experts. They might have an awareness of mind uploading, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, and they might have an interest in the topic, but they're not people who are actively working in the field. I'm going to be doing primarily qualitative research, which is very different from what the University of Helsinki have been doing. Qualitative research, as I'm sure many of you are aware, helps you to understand the reasons behind people's attitudes. So I'm looking for depth of understanding versus breadth and a big sample, which you traditionally get in quantitative. I have done a little bit of early work already in this area, and people's perceptions and reactions to date are one of the reasons that I've devised my current research pathway, which I'm going to run with you in a minute. So let me tell you a little bit about what I've found. Before I do, I've done two small-scale studies. The first was 15 minutes. It was a semi-structured online survey. I spoke to 91 people. The second was individual depth interviews, again, with the general public, and that was much more exploratory. I had some initial ideas about what I might find, although you're not meant to go in with assumptions, you're meant to go in with an open mind. But what I found was really interesting. We had suspected that trying to talk to people who aren't specialists or working in the field about trying to talk about a hypothetical concept and something that in the case of mind loading in particular is quite a futuristic idea was going to be difficult. And that's exactly what I found. People struggled to describe or discuss or evaluate, and their preconceptions and their perceptions of mind loading, and this is going to come as no surprise to some of you, comes almost exclusively from science fiction. Programs like Black Mirror, which I think most people have seen, films like Transcendence. There's been so much stuff over the last few years. We've got Altered Carbon talking about this particular topic. And the people I spoke to, that's where they've got their ideas from, which is fine, except that it doesn't allow you to make a connection to the work that's going on in the field of whole brain emulation. That was not something that the people I spoke to early on had any awareness or knowledge of. And I didn't want to talk about these kind of concepts and ideas in a sci-fi context. I wanted to try and ground it in science and try and make it, I guess, a bit more believable and a bit more relatable. The other thing that I found really interesting is when you talk particularly about mind uploading, so if you like the furthest end of the spectrum, you get really strong emotional responses. They're very instinctive. You tend to get polarity of opinion. So you'll find people who basically, I'm not paraphrasing particularly accurately, but oh gosh, that's really cool. I could leave a legacy for my loved ones, or we could continue to preserve the brains of great scientists. You know, it's a really amazing idea. But the other end of the spectrum is people who basically think it's spooky, is the sort of word you hear, weird, disturbing. And quite often what you find is people think that it goes against God or nature. There's something about the idea that they really struggle with. So that's interesting in itself. But the other thing that's really interesting is that trying to get people to look at a concept like mind uploading from a different perspective is really difficult. People tend to be quite fixed, and if you try and encourage a discussion or you try and challenge them, and you may well have come up against this yourselves, they just push back. And I remembered reading something by, I think he's a neurobiologist, I could be wrong, a guy called Bruce Wexler. And he basically had a really lovely quote. He said, when we're talking about human perceptions and actions, we ignore, forget, or attempt to actively discredit information that is inconsistent with these structures. And by structures, what he's referring to is like our mental model of the world. So if you've formed an opinion on something and somebody gives you information which is contrary to that opinion you've formed, our natural response as humans is to basically find a way to sort of filter that challenging bit of information out. And this is exactly what I found in my early work. So I had to have a rethink, and quite a big rethink, as my supervisors would tell you, about how I was going to take the public on a research journey that was going to give me something that was meaningful and relatable and actually linked back to the science in the field of whole brain emulation, not just talking about sci-fi like scenarios. So this is what I have come up with. Basically, there's three prongs, if you like, and I'll talk a little bit more about the detail in a moment. This is idea that I want people to evaluate in the context of the research that's currently going on in the field of whole brain emulation. I want to enable them to actually really understand and think about what this kind of research and the kind of developments would mean to them on an individual level. And I want to explore it using memory. And again, I'll talk about that in a little more detail in a moment. But memory is something that we're all familiar with. It's a key part of the mind. And to me, it seemed like quite a logical conceptual platform to try and work off. And I'm pleased to say, when I ran this past Randall, he also thought it was a good idea, which gives me some confidence that I'm actually on the right path. So, excuse me, I'll just have a drink. What am I going to be actually doing with the public during my research? Sorry, I slipped a slide. I'm going to do something that's not that common. I'm going to set up a panel of people, a longitudinal panel. So I'm basically going to take the same individuals, and rather than just doing one research study with them and then moving on and recruiting other people, I'm going to stay with the same people, and they're going to stay with me over the next 1 to 2 years, because that gives me a chance to really unpick the perceptions that they have and to find different ways of exploring these, and hopefully different ways of making them think differently about some of the context and enable them better understanding, basically. So by this, I'm going to have a depth and a richness of insight, which I don't think, quite genuinely, I would get talking to people about one part of it and then going and talking to somebody else about another part. They need to come on a journey with me, basically. And this will enable me to do precisely that. I will be able to take person A, for example. I will be able to talk to them at the beginning of the project. I'll be able to talk to them all the way through over the next 1 or 2 years and actually see how their journey unfolds. And there's a whole range of really cool things we can do. There's a whole range of different qualitative research. So this is the idea. It's the journey, basically, at an individual level. The most important consideration for me in terms of who I'm going to speak to is basically age. And again, I'll explain a little bit about why this is the key driver. I've picked age bands that basically follow our Office for National Statistics in the UK. They're fairly standard. They go up to 64, and then the final age band is 65 and above. However, in discussions with my supervisors, we considered the fact that actually between 65 and 85 and above is actually, there can potentially be really big difference in terms of people's cognitive ability. So I'm going to split that top age band of 65 and above to what is called young old, I like that, middle old, and old old. And this basically will acknowledge the fact that age is the single strongest risk factor for significant cognitive changes. And if you think about the fact I'm going to be talking about memory and ultimately mind, that obviously fits in quite nicely. The other really strong thing about thinking about memory and how we are as people, if you like, is that in the UK, I haven't got figures for other countries at the moment, 1 in 14 of the UK population have a form of dementia. And so that means that most of us, or a decent proportion of us at least, will have had experience of a friend or a family member who've had a dementia. And so we're going to be able to talk about this and the impact it might have on day-to-day living and cognitive ability and memory in a way that's personal and it's meaningful. And that's the thing that is really important. People have to be able to talk in a way that is relatable and resonant. I'm trying or hoping to recruit about 4 to 5 people in each of those different 9 age bands. So that's going to be a sample of around 36 to 45. That doesn't sound a lot, but it's actually quite a large sample for qualitative research. And obviously what I need to build in is the fact that I have to keep these people engaged with me and interested in the topic through the journey. So age is the big one. The other thing I'm not recruiting by, but I'm going to be looking at in terms of analysis, is basically attitudes to new technology and how people adopt new technology. Again, I think this is probably quite a logical leap. If we're going to be talking about things like mind augmentation, cognitive enhancement, mind uploading, people's attitudes towards science and tech generally may well play a role. There is a model that was first devised, I think, in 1962 by a guy called Rogers. It was updated in 2003. I think that's the last update. But it's still relevant and it's really widely cited and it's used a lot in commerce. And what Rogers did, and I thought this might be useful background or perhaps could be useful for other projects, is he broke people down into 1 of 5 groups. He's replicated his findings across different samples and different research areas. And it seems that we split into 1 of 5 types of people. So the first one are innovators. And these, as you would expect, are the first people to adopt an innovation. There's a few other characteristics that they share in terms of risk taking, chronological age, social class, etc. But these are the people that when something new comes along, they will be taking it on, giving it a go straight away. And you work through, and at the other end of Rogers' line are the laggards, as he calls them, and these are people who are the last to adopt an innovation. They're the people that hang behind the curve. So I've got this in the back of my mind because I think it might be quite an interesting way of looking at some of the data. And just to give you an idea, only 2.5% of people are traditionally fall into the category of innovators. Most people, typical distribution curve sits somewhere in the middle. So I've got my panel set up. I've recruited them in different age bands. I've made a note of how they feel about technology and how likely they are to adopt technology and at what point. So the big question, I guess, is what exactly am I going to do with these willing participants? So I'm going to take the same people, as I've said. I'm going to work with them over the next 1 to 2 years. I'm going to use a range of different qualitative tools and techniques. And I'm planning at the moment, although we are still playing around with this, 4 stages. So let's have a look at the stages and see how you feel about them. The concept is basically to work from the past to the present to the future and end up in the far future. So the first stage, stage 1, is what I've entitled at the moment current memories. So if you were part of my panel, and this was the first bit of research we were doing together, we probably would have met before, we'd have had a bit of a talk, but this is the first significant chunk that we're going to do. I would ask you to think back and identify the key moments and memories from when you were born up to present day. And the sort of things we'd be thinking about is, okay, so what are the key memories? How did you capture them at the time? And obviously, that sort of question could be very different if you asked an 80-year-old or if you asked a 20-year-old. If you're 80, you didn't have the endless social media applications, which are so commonly used by younger people today. So we think about the memories and we think about how you might have captured them for posterity. We might think about, when do you revisit them? What sort of things make you remember? It could be music, it could be a smell, it could be a particular environment. And can you have a sense, perhaps, of which of those memories are really vivid and which are the memories that have actually become a bit fuzzy or degraded over time? Think about what it means when you can't remember things that are important to you, and start to think about what it might mean if your memories could be preserved or even enhanced. So this is like the baseline stage, stage 1. And because it's qualitative, every question I ask is going to be explored. I want to understand why people say and think what they do, not just what they do, but why they do it. So we started off, we've done a little memory board of when you were young to where you are now. And the next stage is trying to imagine the future. So this is entitled Future Memories. And the idea of this is that I might say to you, okay, so we've talked about all the memories you've had and how you want to catch them and which ones are really important. Can you try and look forward? And can you imagine some of the key events in your life from now? I've got to think about how to phrase up until your death. It depends how squeamish people are. But try and imagine what sort of things you might want to make a memory of in the future. Perhaps if you were late teens, you might be thinking about going to university. You might be thinking about your first job, making a career, finding a partner, having children. So I'm going to ask people to try and almost draw a future memory board, if you like. Same sort of idea. What memories would you make? Which ones would you really want to remember, to hang on to? Which would you hate to lose? And at this point, we're probably going to start to play around with this idea of data privacy or mind privacy, as one of my internal examiners said. So which of these memories would you be happy to share with people? And which of these memories are really private and personal to you and you wouldn't want people having access to them? And again, at this point, this is probably the point that I'm going to start to talk about digital technology and start to introduce this idea that some kind of digital tech could have a role in helping you to remember, helping you to retrieve your memories. And I remember reading, although I can't remember the exact details, about some of the work they're doing to use particular cues on apps on your phone, so it will help trigger memories. So it's that sort of idea that technology would perhaps help you remember. Stage 1 and 2 are actually pretty straightforward as a researcher. However, as we move forward into the future, stages 3 and 4, that's where it becomes much more challenging and actually quite interesting, because I'm going to need quite a lot of creativity and I'm going to need to be quite careful how I introduce and talk about technology as a foundation to start to discuss concepts that people might not be as familiar with, and ones that perhaps seem more futuristic, like brain to computer interface, brain to machine interfaces. And again, just start them thinking about where we could go in the future. So, for example, stage 3 and 4, I'm going to start to try and talk about advances in neuroscience and neurotech to make people aware of some of the things that are going on. This is by no means an exhaustive list. It's not necessarily even that up to date, but it's the sort of things that I could potentially use as springboards for discussion. So these whole idea of the neuroprosthetics, and just this idea that maybe there'd be something that could enhance, augment your cognitive abilities, and particularly your memory. So we start to think forward at this point. So, okay, we've done stage 1. We've talked about your memories to date. We've done stage 2, and you've devised this kind of memory board going forward. So now in stage 3, we're going to move on a step and say, okay, well, imagine that you could upload and download your memories directly from your brain or your mind. Imagine there was a way that you could do that. And start to think about what impact that would have. If you could store, upload, keep your memories safe, in theory forever, digitally. What about if you could download them into something else, or just download them to look at them in a different form? What would it mean to you if your memories could be edited, enhanced? You could just delete the ones that you didn't want to think about. What would all of that mean to you, and what would it mean to you as an individual? So we've got to future tech, okay, and now at the last stage, by which point they will have suffered along with me for about a year or 2 years, we're going to go far future, where mind and memory, because it's, well, memory, I should say, memory and mind could be uploaded. And try and imagine what that would mean to you as an individual. What would it mean if you look at a wider societal level, humanity as a species? What sort of things would you hope for in this brave new world? And what would you fear? And what would it look like? The lovely thing about stage 4 is, hopefully, in theory, because people will have spent a year or 2 years with me, they should be invested and they should be embedded in this hypothetical journey. And hopefully, for stage 4, I'm going to be able to use some really interesting and creative approaches to try and help people imagine. Design fiction is not something I was aware of until I started my PhD, but it's basically a way of using design to help or facilitate people to understand how things might be in the future. Why might they be that way? And if you're interested, it's in the references, I think, but there's a really great book by Thornton, Lindley and Cooper called The Little Book of Design Fiction for the Internet of Things, which is actually really, really easy to read. Obviously, virtual reality is quite an interesting tool that we might be able to play with here. I'm really lucky because at Horizon, they've had what they call a mixed reality lab, which covers real, augmented virtuality, virtual reality for over 20 years. So upstairs above computer science, there is a whole floor full of really cool stuff that you can play with. So with a bit of luck, we might be able to do something there. So hopefully, by stage 4, I've actually taken somebody on this journey from the past right the way to the future. And so I'll have an understanding of their individual narrative and how they might feel about this kind of technology. But the other side of that is I want to be able to place it into context. And this is where the sort of the science and the tech and how society has evolved comes into play. So the other part of my research, apart from the general public, for want of a better term, is to keep an eye on how science and tech has evolved and is evolving. And that's a combination of desk research, just keeping your eyes peeled, and obviously I'll go into a bit more detail, talking to people as well. And so what I'm hoping, for example, is that if I've interviewed somebody in their 60s, that I will not only understand how their journey and their memory and their mind has changed, but I can also overlay a technological timeline. So I can see what happened in that lifespan that has changed the way that they can capture or curate or share or store memories. And again, if you think about it, the way a 60-year-old has captured their memories is probably very, very different from somebody who's 18. And so by recruiting people across a wide age span, I can effectively sample different decades of technological innovation. In the last decade or so, things have moved on at great speed. And I will be able to reflect that when I link it to individual journeys. This is the plan anyway. So apart from desk research, the other thing I'm doing, which I'm currently setting up at the moment, is interviews with experts. Experts in this sense being people who are actively involved in the field of whole brain emulation. Excuse me while I slurp. And I'm going to use something called the Delphi technique. This is a relatively new addition to my repertoire, I have to be honest. But my understanding of it is it's basically a way of using informed intuitive judgment to look forward. And it is particularly useful, so the literature tells me, for long-range predictions where expert opinions are the only information source. Well, you couldn't think of a better field, really, than whole brain emulation and potentially mind uploading, because the only people who have an informed opinion about it are people who are active in that field. So the Delphi technique involves 3 rounds of questionnaires. And in this current situation, and also to allow geographic reach, I'm going to be doing it online. And what it does, which I'll talk through in a little bit more detail in a moment, it's multiple iterations of a questionnaire, and the goal is to develop consensus. I had a conversation with Randall on Saturday about the whole issue of what is consensus. And interestingly, in the literature, there doesn't seem to be a definitive thing that says at this point you have reached consensus. So I'm going to have to make a judgment call at the beginning and decide how I define it. But we will get there. So round 1, traditionally in a Delphi, you start with an open-ended questionnaire. So the idea is you chuck the net out wide on a key topical question, and you use that as a starting point for collecting information. What you do is you get round 1 back, you sync yourself among millions of emails or questionnaires or whatever, and analyse it. And from the results of round 1, you devise a semi-structured questionnaire. So it would pick up on key topics that have come out from the open-ended round 1. Then what you do is you send that round 2 questionnaire out to your experts. They come back with replies. You look at those, you design another questionnaire, and it goes out for round 3. But what's really clever about the Delphi technique, and why I'm very grateful my supervisor suggested it, is the whole point of it is that people can review the comments and feedback that the other experts have provided, in an anonymised form, obviously, and they are allowed to, or asked to, would they like to change and modify their previous responses based on what other experts are saying. So, for example, if I had asked my experts, and 60% of them, on average, had predicted that whole brain emulation would be realised in 45 years' time, picking a number out of the air, but an individual expert had predicted that it would be realised in 20 years, the question would be, well, you said 20 years, most people said 45. Why did you say 20? And would you like a chance to change that opinion or decision? Or would you like to keep it as it is? So it's a really nice way of sharing an expert view across a group of experts. And actually, hopefully, we might meet in the middle. The particular challenge for doing it in this field is that there are so many fields involved in this area. How realistic it is to get consensus across people working in nanotech, biology, physics, chemistry, robotics, AI, neuroscience, neurotech, I don't know. But we're going to start with round 1 and we're going to see what happens. I've been toying around with my questions. I thought I might be there, but I'm not sure now, if I'm honest. So I'm probably going to go back and have another think before I start. But the expert interviews are relatively imminent. So I've done all of this. I've dragged a crowd of people with me, hopefully in an enjoyable fashion, down the road. And we've drawn their individual journeys. I've looked at what's happened in science and tech. Through this time span, I've spoken to the experts. So what am I hoping my PhD will produce? Well, the hope is that I will be able to add another dimension to the 2008 roadmap, that I will be able to provide some understanding of how people might feel about this journey, and what they think the good parts are and what the bad parts. And I'm also hoping that I'm going to be able to give a sort of a society view, in a sense, and also a technological and scientific innovation timeline. So that's me. That's my last slide. Let me just whiz through the others, just so you can see. There's a list of resources. Yes, I have got a little book of design fiction on there. If in case you're interested and you want to read any more about it, there is a few slides there. So that is me done. Has anybody got any questions? I'm coming out.
Thank you so much, Angela.
Hello, I can see you now.
That was a really good presentation of the reasons why you're doing this dissertation, your choice of method, and in a sense also the results that you want to have, although I think I may still have a few questions there.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't actually know exactly how to formulate that question yet, so I'll hold off just for a moment. I think, yeah, obviously you said that in the examples of the type of neuroscience research that is happening today related to memory, that those were only a couple of examples that you just happened to throw in there. So I know that that wasn't meant to be a complete list. We should definitely sit down and come up with a longer list.
Yes.
And one of the things that, if you want to make that connection to mind uploading, that should definitely be in there is the actual exploration of the brain as the matter of the brain that you can, that you can look at under a microscope, and that you can look at the connectome that's there and find where those memories are actually encoded in it, and the work that's going on in that field, right? Yeah. But I think
you just volunteered yourself for a bit more work.
Yeah. So I'll think a little bit more about the question for the desired outcomes, and in the meantime, I'll let other people ask some questions or make comments.
I was curious about the experts you had mentioned, experts in the field of whole brain emulation, and I was wondering if they were specifically people who were only working on it in the context of thinking about whole brain emulation, or related subject matter which would produce contributing technologies that could be applied to whole brain emulation.
That is a very good question, Anita. I have a provisional list of about 120 people, and they have been sourced at the moment from anybody I've seen contributing in the field. It spans a huge range of disciplines, so hopefully I'm not just going to get a very narrow core. I'm going to get quite a wide spread of different people working on different aspects. I've run through that list briefly with Randall, and we're going to have another look at it. But I'm hoping to get a whole range of different perspectives. That might make consensus a bit harder, but we'll see. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and yeah, it may make it harder, but also more interesting.
Yes. Yes. Well, I think that's one of the things that makes the field so fascinating, is quite how many different disciplines are involved.
If you don't mind my jumping right back in, I just used the raise hand thing, but I'll just talk anyway. Just because it attaches directly to that question and to what you were mentioning. When we did have our conversation about the list, I mean, one of the things that was perhaps a little different from how you presented it right now is that your list was actually divided into two camps. It was divided into those who are protagonists and those who are, antagonists or adversarial in a sense. And the names were kind of you did a first sorting just to see what side
Yes.
they belong on, and in some cases it wasn't entirely clear. And then we talked about how you would talk to them about it, because many of them may never even have heard the term whole brain emulation before. So there's a whole way of getting into it. And then we talked about how just talking about memory is a very good way to start talking, because memory is a safe topic. But
Yes.
not only is it safe, it's also almost all-encompassing, as in once you dig in deep enough and you talk about what memory actually is, and you start thinking of it in mathematical, physical, biological forms, in every way, all the different ways that memory appears. And it's not just what you were going through in the storyline where people are supposed to think about their memories, but all the other kinds of memory that you have too. At some point, you're left with almost nothing else when you're asking, so what else do you need to do if you're going to do a mind upload? So it gets you there, and it's a good way to talk to them about it. So is there a reason why you presented the list of people differently this time?
Yes, because when I wrote the slides, and the way I think about it is multidisciplinary experts. The reason that you saw the list you saw when they were neatly divided, occasionally slightly randomly, into the two camps, is because one of my supervisors was very keen that we tried to get a balanced range of people. And so that list, the working list, is to try and say, have I got a list of people who I think they believe it could be possible, versus a list of people who, for whatever reasons, do not believe that it is possible. And that's why it's a sort of a working list to try and to make sure I cover a whole range of different opinions. I don't know whether it's there yet, but that is the plan.
Mm-hmm. And then there's that whole other issue of figuring out how you're going to weight their responses, because, just counting how many people think something is feasible versus not isn't necessarily the right approach when people have very different amounts of insight into an issue. Yeah.
I think the technique is a really interesting one. I think it's going to be, as we talked about, very much a case of trying to find an open first question, but gives them something to hang their hat on. Because I know my initial response, you actually said, I'm not sure I could answer that. But trying to find a question that opens it up enough for me to see what comes back from round one, gives me some sense of direction and where I could go.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
How are you determining your experts?
Literally from, at the moment, the list comprises people who have been at conferences, have written papers, they may have well have been involved with carbon copies, and there's another whole set of people who do work in slightly different areas. So that's literally how. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but I think some of the names are just really familiar. They're people that we all know. Does that answer it?
I guess I was wondering if if you were choosing them like from distinct fields you'd pre-decided, and that they would already be working for specific, I guess, types of organizations, or at a certain level in their career or research, or if there are certain qualifiers.
I looked at using the index, which basically looks at how many people have cited them and what kind of a profile you have, but that seemed to be quite arbitrary. So what I've actually really done, I guess, is people who are considered to be experts. They've written a lot, they've spoken a lot, and if I showed you the list of the names, I suspect you would recognize quite a lot of them. It's not at the moment any more scientific than that, and it might be that I have to tweak it a bit.
I think Ken has his hand up.
Oh,
Hello.
thanks. I had a question. It strikes me. I wonder what your opinion is if you did this exact type of survey, this in-depth. I love the idea that it's in-depth and walk them along. If you did this in terms of, let's say, landing a person on the moon or colonizing the moon.
Yep.
And you did it right after Newton, after the invention of the hot air balloon, let's say, or right after Robert Goddard's successful thing, or right after Sputnik. How do you think this would play out? Because it seems to me like the the hardest part is you've got people that are they don't know Newton's laws. They don't believe Newton's laws. Unless they're Newton, they're not going to trust you to convey Newton's laws to them. and that'll be the main sticking point.
I think that's perfectly valid. I think the first thing I'd say that you alluded to really well is that context is everything. It's that in a sense, even by doing this now or in the next year or so, that in itself would produce a different result had I done it 20 years ago when the tech wasn't there, or 30 years in the future. The second thing about convincing them, is, if I'm paraphrasing, is challenging. I am hoping that if we use something like memory, that by the time we get to the point that I'm talking to them about some of the scientific advancements, I'm not going to be convincing them, but I'm going to be able to give them an understandable synopsis of what's going on in the field, and use that as something to create discussion. So I can say, well, okay, how do you feel about that? Because that's what's missing at the moment. There isn't, from the initial work, there isn't anything that grounds this idea in science. It's just sci-fi. And so I'm hoping if I can find suitable examples, and obviously Randall and the other guys will help, and say, but look, this is what's happening in the field. Did you know about that? What do you think about it? What would it mean to you? That hopefully I will be able to take them on the journey. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, thanks.
We're assuming it's going to work.
Angela, I just want to make sure that I have the like the numbers right. So it's going to take 1 to 2 years. So or like maybe even putting it simply 2 years. So is each phase half a year?
That's probably. Sorry, I didn't explain that very well. No, that's really the span between doing stage one, looking at setting up stage one, for example, running stage one, analysing stage one, and then having a good think and a talk with everybody involved about, okay, what does this mean? What do we need to do to make stage two work? So built into that is a hell of a lot of iteration, because I don't want to do a stage and move on to the next stage without understanding what I've got to work with. Because I might find that my plans for stage two need to be tweaked. I don't know. And that's the joy about qualitative research, is that you can be flexible. So I'm not going to be like locked with them endlessly for 1 to 2 years. I think they'd probably run away screaming. But I'm going to have a short, intense period of time when we work together. And then there's going to be a period of time where we look at that and we reflect on it and go, how do we go forward? Does that explain it?
Okay, yeah. And I'm sorry if you maybe also said it, but how many people in the group?
In the panel, the longitudinal panel, I'm hoping to get 4 to 5 for each of the 9 age bands. So that's 36 to 45, I believe. That's quite a large sample for qualitative.
You said that was from each age grouping? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sorry. Under basically the 6 age bands in the census, which go, I think it's 18 to 24, blah, 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 up to 65. And what I'm going to do is split down the older people, 65 to 85 and above, just because of the cognitive change that can happen as you get older. I don't think we can safely lump maybe a 65-year-old with a 90-year-old at that point. So I'm hoping to get a good spread of ages.
Michael, just to be sure it's clear, we're making a distinction between the longitudinal group that she's following and the group of experts that she's talking to. Those are not the same.
Ah, okay.
Sorry, thank you, Randall. I don't think I helped there, Michael.
And what's your method for looking for members? So you've gotten like your best chance at getting like the average, so to speak, range of people, specifically meaning like their like initial understanding of the concept, also like their tendencies for whether or not they accept it. Like how would you plan on looking for members without like initially attracting the potential people who would be like more accepting or understanding or familiar with the concept?
Yes. There's about 3 really interesting points in there. The first thing is, in terms of actually recruiting, I'm going to go as wide as I possibly can. So I'm going to use local media. I'm going to put some stuff on the internet. There's a couple of sites I can use, but I'm going to try and really spread it out. I don't just want to go to traditional recruitment sites. So that's the first thing. I'm not there yet because it's away in the future. The second thing is, I'm going to recruit by age, but I'm probably not going to set any other quotas or requirements in terms of their attitudes to technology or mind uploading, for example. I'm going to let that fall out naturally, so that should work. You had another question, it's completely gone. Age, recruitment. What was the other thing you said, Michael? Sorry, I'm getting old. How was I going to make sure I didn't just get, sorry, yes, how was I going to make sure I didn't just get people who are really interested in this field?
Yes.
Yeah. Hopefully by spreading the recruitment net wide, hopefully. Unfortunately, the one thing you cannot police for in any research study is always self-selecting. People who do research, yes? People who are interested in this topic will naturally gravitate towards it. I will spread out as much as I can in terms of recruitment, and when I check their initial attitudes early on, if I find that I've got far too many people who are one end of the scale or the other, then I will basically recruit some more and try and even it out a bit. But there is always a challenge. You know, people who like research, and if you like this topic, you're going to want to talk about it. Does that answer that?
Yes, thank you. Do you think that by the data that you're going to get at the end, that not only putting that in the roadmap as an update, but will that help to help organizations like Carbon Copies with ways to reach out to the public to gain that, to help to help the general public with that understanding and acceptance. I'm not sure yet how that would go about. And do you think that overall that the results of that could help with the advancements of the research and development, or do you think it's maybe more towards just like establishing the acceptance of this concept? I hope I'm explaining that correct.
Yeah, no, you are.
Okay.
I think it will be novel just in the sense that nobody seems to be answering this question. So from that point of view, understanding the acceptance will come. But to be honest, what I'm really hoping for, and one of the reasons that we're all working together, is that I want it to inform the stuff that you're doing as well. You know, we have a similarly aligned interests in the sense of like public outreach and public understanding, which we both had before we came together. So I'm hoping that it will be a complementary activity as well as part of my thesis. And I find it really strange. I know that we are a long way away, but the fact that nobody had actually asked anybody what they knew about it or what they thought and published anything about it, I was really surprised by. So hopefully it will be new information, and hopefully it will inform, you know, Carbon Copies and just the general public in terms of where we might be going. Does that answer it?
It does, yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think you just answered part of my output question that I still had. Because, yeah, part of it was really to talk a little bit more about what you hope it's going to do, what the output is, what the, say, the value of the output is, if we put it in those business terms. But I think to be very concrete, another question I had is as the form of the output, the format or the rate of output, as in, are you planning to collect data, evaluate, iterate, and then publish only at the very end and make that just in the form of the dissertation or contribution to the roadmap? Or is there a plan to also publish partial results or insights that you gain along the way? And what kind of a what kind of form could that take, in your opinion? Just wondering where this would all tie into what we're doing in the meantime.
I think that's an extremely good question. I do not have a firm plan. However, I have a concept in my head. The concept is not just to publish at the end. Yes, obviously, I mean, it's my thesis, but I would like to be able to work with other people at Nottingham and Horizon and with you guys and be able to put some of the information out as early stages. Maybe because I'm from a commercial background and in some ways I'm not particularly an academic, I don't want just to lock it down in a corner and people don't get involved with it. I think the whole value of it is sharing it.
Yeah.
So ideally, I would hope that along the way we can make use of it. That's the point of it for me. Is that
right? And how open are you to, I guess, nudges in the sense of directing where your work is going? Because I imagine, say for example, that you have some initial findings, and that gives us ideas about what we really would like to know, because either there might be something that we're not understanding about how people see the concepts of whole brain emulation and mind uploading, or because we have a new idea of how to talk to people about it, or if we have some idea of how to steer experts in the right direction, or to get, anyway, we might have some ideas. And if we have these ideas and we're really excited about getting them going somewhere, there's a good chance that whatever we come up with doesn't align well with what you had in mind for your dissertation, and that it doesn't fit, and then you just have to tell us to back off. But how open are you to nudges that steer you in a slightly different direction along the way?
I am within the confines of having to produce thesis. I am as open as I can be, and the reason for that is I'm really lucky. Horizon, as you may well know because of your brother, have a very strange PhD. From my understanding, typically you say, this is what I'm going to research, and that's what you do. Horizon's view is, no, you can go where you want. If it's interesting and it's relevant, and you can make a story which will stand up for a Viva, then you can explore it. So I will always listen to see if it's interesting and if we can work it in. We might not always be able to, but I would always listen.
Oh, yes. And then my final output question. Once you've done your dissertation and you've produced this output, what do you imagine could be done with it? I mean, how does it inform the future? What could be done with it in the future? What could it, because in science we always want to stand on the shoulders of giants, or on the shoulders of many little people put together into giants. What can someone do with your dissertation output then? What's the next step after that?
I would hope that it would be able to inform people what they need to consider as we work towards it being realised, so that people would be more aware of perhaps what ordinary people's hopes and fears would be about the way technology is taking us. The other part of that question is I'm really hoping I can do some more research on the topic. I know that the university and Horizon are very open to the idea of collaborations and funding. So with a bit of luck, I'll finish this and it won't be the end of the story. We can go and do some more.
Excellent. Yeah.
That's my hope.
Great.
I don't think I'm going to answer every question in my dissertation. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I doubt it. Do we have a copy of this presentation you just gave, by the way? Did you send one to Michael, maybe?
Yeah, and I can upload it, whatever. Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Or Anita, actually. I keep forgetting who's actually in charge of the journal club now.
Okay, I will send it to Anita.
So I would like to understand a little bit more about how you're going to transition between phases based on where the panelists are at in their whether or not they are I suppose you could say more accepting or they've changed their mind. For example, at the end of the third phase about memory, if you've gotten say a group of people who who would say like, okay, yeah, I'm convinced that like using a something with like this kind of technology to preserve memory and enhance them, that would be beneficial. It's something I would accept and that I would even promote. But you've got then you've got the group that still think that is either, I suppose, unrealistic, or as you put it in your presentation, like against like nature or God or something. How would you treat those groups differently when you are then going to start talking about the other incorporations, like there are several things on your list which I think were like about cognitive ability. I'm sorry, I don't remember the whole thing, but like, how are you going to?
Don't worry.
Okay. How are you going to start treating? I'm curious about this, like specifically. How are you going to treat those groups differently?
At this precise moment in time, I don't know, because I haven't written an interview guide or worked out what sort of tools and techniques I'm going to use. But there are two scenarios that I can see in my head. And again, this is the joy of qualitative research, and the joy of it is it's me doing this. So whatever I decide to do, that's fine, because that's what happens. I'm the one who's going to be interviewing. I will either take the group that haven't moved and are still concerned and or resistant, and continue to take them down the same path as the group that have already moved and are a bit more amenable. Or I might at that point go, right, okay, I'm going to take you in two slightly different directions because of where you've come to. I don't know exactly how I would take them in different directions at the moment, but that is an option. And again, it's one of the reasons I love qualitative research, and one of the reasons I like doing it myself is because you have that flexibility. I could look at that point and I could go, yeah, okay, this group are really, they're not buying it. This group are fine. And I can sit and think, okay, what's the best next step? So it's quite fluid, which I know might seem a bit strange, but to me it's one of the strengths. You don't get stuck down a path when you can't predict what's going to happen. Does that?
It does, yeah.
Answer it?
And when you're, I'm sorry, I just want like a follow up to that, or like a related one. Are the discussions going to be all like in a large group with all the panelists, so the panelists can be, so they can be influenced by each other, or is this a strict one-on-one?
You raised an extremely good point, and something that I am so aware of that I forgot to write down, which is terrible. No, it's going to be one-on-ones, because it's an individual journey. Everybody's past, memories, whatever, is different. I need to understand them in the context of that person and their journey to date. So they will all be one-to-ones at the moment anyway. Okay. I might, possibly, you never know, we might get to the end of stage 4 and I might decide I want to add another stage in when I bring them together. And we have a debate or discussion. But again, the joy of my PhD is that if I want to change it, I can. So I'm quite lucky. I know that makes me sound very woolly, but I've learned from experience not to try and second guess what might happen. There'll always be a surprise in there somewhere.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, please go ahead, Ken.
Hello, Ken. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think what would really be helpful is to, and it seems like this is what you're trying to do with this one-on-one long-term stuff, is to get people to articulate what off-ramp they're taking.
Yes.
And when, how far along the journey, and when they're going, and to really understand that if they go all the way up until personal identity, and you say, okay, what if, instead of saving your memories on a hard drive and then getting them replayed back to you, what if somebody else saved their memories and had those memories played back to you?
Yes.
Your own memories are your own memories. We got a or what if, instead of preserving memories, what if your entire mind was preserved, and now there's a copy of you, and they, that's where they us. And or memories are part of the soul, and there is no forgetting of memories. It's just lack of access, because all that the neurons are really doing is their little radio antennas, of course. It's less about convincing people as understanding really why they what part of the journey they get off, and say no more beyond this.
Yes. No, that's
is there an initial taxonomy that, if you had to guess right now, that if you were going to come up with this type of people fall into these categories, we'll guess right now, or do you think that that's unhelpful to make that hypothesis?
I don't think I could make that hypothesis, but what I remember that I need to check, and I will check from the pilot, is that there was a small percentage of people, and I can't remember exactly how many, and I should, who were really up for it, in a non-technical term. I am suspecting that I'm going to have more people who are slightly nervous about the concept, but that is not formalized as a hypothesis in any way, shape or form. But you did raise something else very interesting, is it might be, again, that I get to stage 4 and then we do something else to see could we push them further. I don't know. I don't quite know where the journey's going to end. And that's really, to me, that's the really exciting thing about it, to be honest. Yeah,
that would be frightening. Maybe there's a level that I could go, that I won't even go to.
Yeah, but that might be something that it becomes meaningful to explore. But it is, you are spot on. It's about understanding. I'm not trying to take people and convince them that this is the way that they should go, but I think there's a real lack of understanding of why people feel the way they do.
Dan, I think if you had a question, please feel free.
Yeah, thank you. I was listening earlier on YouTube, so I caught all of your talk. I just realized that I could join on Google Hangouts here. I think this is going to be really interesting to see how this research program, what results you get from this research program. I was wondering, could you talk a little more about the component of interviewing the experts, because I'm really interested in what timelines people have, and especially experts. And there's been a lot of work interviewing experts on AI timelines,
yes.
But I haven't seen any work on whole brain emulation timelines. And that whole brain emulation seems, almost just as impactful as very advanced AI, but there's really no work that I know of in that area. So I was wondering, how are you going to find the experts, and are you just going to ask them to predict a date with some confidence level, or what kind of questions are you going to ask them?
That's a very good question. There are two slightly separate components. The first one is that the expert study, the Delphi study, is not as fluid or as in-depth as, for example, an individual interview. So we will pick an initial question and we will chuck that out there and we'll see what comes back. And then, as you heard, the subsequent rounds will be informed by that. Interestingly, one of my provisional questions was, how feasible do you think whole brain emulation is? And then there was another one about timelines. So that may be something we ask, but I'm not sure yet. I had a conversation with Randall yesterday, and I've now started to rethink some of my questions in a good way. So that might come in it. That might be part of the timelines. It might not be. However, the other option that is floating around, and again, it depends what I find, is I might then do some individual interviews with particular experts. And at that point, then I could dig down into a little bit more detail about what they feel. I know I sound incredibly woolly, don't I? I do have a plan. It's just that because I'm cautious that whatever road I start off with the experts is the road to some extent we're going to go down, that first question's got to be right. And I thought I'd nailed it, and now I'm not so sure. So you can blame Randall for that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Right, and I imagine a lot of these experts' time is going to be limited, so you want to really hone that. One other thing I'm really interested in, which I'm not sure you would want to tackle, but one thing I'm very interested in is the question of what bottlenecks there might be, because that seems to be a huge source of debate among experts. So that might be something you might want to look into at some point.
I had, again, interestingly enough, on the provisional list of questions, slightly phrased in a slightly different way, but barriers and enablers is something that's been floating around as well. And again, I think that might well be something we do look into. I think it's a really interesting area.
Great.
It's gone very quiet.
Yeah, the floor is still open for more questions if there are any. That doesn't mean you have to force yourself to come up with any. I mean, Angela has done a fantastic job of presenting her dissertation plans. And of course, the questions were very, very relevant. And I also have a feeling that this is not going to be the last time that Angela presents as her research progresses. So we'll hear from her again. But yeah, if you still have questions, please do ask or make comments.
Yes, I don't think you're going to get rid of me. I think I'm going to be floating around for a while.
Hey, Angela, I do have a question.
Go.
Might be an odd one because I'm going to be asking about public policy a bit, and I wonder if you have any experience coming from a commercial and medical world about handling, suppose your study finds out that people actually believe it's going to come sooner rather than later, and experts tend to agree on that point as well. Suppose then you're going to push it through some sort of body like the British Sociological Association or whichever one is handling public opinion with this topic. Do you foresee, or maybe the better question to ask, why do you think there hasn't been a sort of sociological study published for an emulation before? If it is because nobody's just doing it, and the results would be positive in terms of we're expecting it to be sooner and people are excited about it, do you feel like there's an opportunity to push for public policy change based on your discovery?
There's two really interesting points there. In terms of why there hasn't been some kind of psychological or sociological study, I don't know for sure, but I wonder if it's simply because it seems so far away that maybe it's not something that people have felt the need to research because it's not going to happen that quickly and it's not imperative. But that is a complete guess. I was really surprised that the University of Helsinki are the only people who seem to be doing anything else on it. I'm not completely sure why. In terms of informing public policy, in theory, if we find something that is pertinent and influential, with the normal academic caveats, I can't see any reason why we couldn't use part of that in conjunction with carbon copies and share it. Again, I think it comes back down to if we can use it within the confines of the academic world. My view is I would like to use it. I can't see much point doing research and not doing anything with it. So hopefully, if we do get that side of the result, there will be an opportunity. I don't just want to sit on it and bury it in a dark room for 4 years, basically. Does that answer your question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, absolutely. The first point you brought up about why you suspect it's not being picked up, totally get that. And I can imagine that if AI had no application and it was only about replicating what a human thinks like into a computer, it likely would not get as much buzz as it does. Yeah. Maybe the intermediate attention to what is possible as we progress towards whole brain emulation is something that is the difference between, say, problems of, the applicability of AI and whole brain emulation and how they differ, why the public doesn't seem to be so interested in the topic. But there could be a plethora of other reasons. I'm just very curious about why you haven't seen any studies published on the topic sociologically, psychologically. Psychological aspect is a big one. I mean, I'm really interested about why do people believe in whole brain emulation. I think even knowing that information would help our cause a lot more. But there's nothing you can find on the internet.
You touched on something else actually that's really interesting. It's this, in the UK, anyway, I'm talking from a very UK perspective here now, in the last few years, the number of programs on mind uploading has just gone for nothing. So you're in a really weird situation, at least here, that people are very aware of the name, some vague idea of the concept because they've seen Black Mirror, but there isn't the scientific awareness of the scientific foundation. So you're in a really strange position in this country anyway, that people sort of think they know what it is, but actually when you dig down to it, they don't, because it's been informed by the real sci-fi side of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. Teleportation, mind reading, all these things tend to be represented as something we really want, but don't know how to get there. And I guess there's this big divide that you're talking about.
We say it, and it's part of, I know it's something that Carbon Copies believes, that I want to take the sci-fi out of it. Not that I want to stop the possibilities, but just for people to realise that people are seriously working in this area. And even when I present at university, you get, really? I didn't know people spend money on whole brain emulation. It's like, So we shall see. Yes, Upload is amazing, Dan. Do you know what?
Yeah, I haven't watched it, but I heard that it touches on some of the philosophical aspects too.
It's very clever because it's billed as a comedy, and it starts off quite light-hearted, and in true good drama tradition, it gets dark, and you don't expect it to get dark, and it suddenly gets quite nasty. And the other really funny thing about it, without giving a spoiler, is the place that rich people get uploaded to is called Horizon, which of course is where I'm studying. So this has produced much hilarity.
Wow.
Thomas has raised a very interesting point about interviewing younger people. And yes, Thomas, I definitely want to do under 18s, because the attitudes by age are going to be, I suspect, quite different.
Yeah, it seems like, especially for me anyway, I mean, the concept I got introduced to just by my biology teacher, and within, less than a year or half a year, I was basically, I guess inducted into the Carbon Copies, I guess you can call it a cult. And the concept now seems, just like sliced bread. It's extremely clear. It's like, oh, yeah, that's a natural conclusion. And then when I try to explain it to other people, then it's like, what? No, that doesn't work. Why not? And so, it seems like especially younger people would have a much easier time understanding or accepting the concept, potentially, especially people in biology. So I don't know. I thought that might be interesting, because I'm almost thinking that you'll see like an exponential drop off based on the younger, from if you plot age versus acceptance.
Yes.
Or so you'll see something like.
Yeah.
Thomas, I'm actually. Sorry, Thomas. I'm very, very curious actually, because I think you just said that you were introduced to uploading through your biology teacher. Can you say a little bit more about this?
Oh, well, okay, so I meant more like I was introduced to neuroscience by my biology teacher, and then I'm like, oh,
okay.
So what happens if I simulate stuff? And within not that long after that, I was able to. I found out about carbon copies, and eventually, now I'm pretty involved in.
So you made all the logical connections, basically.
Yeah. So it started with if brains are made of neurons, then we can simulate them, etc.
Well, I was just going to comment. Another really interesting aspect of this research program is not just the difference among age groups, but seeing how they change over time. Since you're going to do follow-ups, and we know the brain gets less plastic over time. So, my guess would be that you may see some of the younger people change their views over the course of a year or two, whereas the elderly would be more sort of stuck in their existing view. And I'm not really sure how much that's really been studied in this way, so that'd be really interesting to see.
There doesn't, apart from the fact that there seems to be a distinct absence of any understanding, I don't know why it took me so long to think of doing a longitudinal panel. But in fairness, I only got there because I realised exactly what we've been talking about. You can't take people from ground zero to here in one hit. It just doesn't work. You've got to have the journey. And I agree with you. I think the evolution and the journey is going to be really interesting.
Actually, I just thought another interesting thing you might want to categorize would be whether or not they're religious.
Yes, that's a very good point. Yeah.
I feel like,
yeah,
I think that's pretty obvious why.
I saw that when I did the online pilot, and actually in some of the individual interviews, that sort of crime against God and nature, any kind of, it's the religious, spiritual aspect that tends to make people very uneasy, and the whole idea that death is a natural part of life is the other thing that made people really uncomfortable. We're supposed to die and things move on. So yes, I think you're completely right. I think there'll be quite a big difference depending on where you fall on that curve.
Yeah, I know personally from personal experience, I've been called like the devil or something because I'm working on. I'm serious. One of my classmates did that to me. I thought was rather amusing, but. I've definitely met significant resistance, especially in conservative religious demographics.
Yes, no, there are definitely, even from my very small scale initial work, there are people who do literally react like it's evil.
Yeah, it's really remarkably interesting. I didn't think it would be so easy to make someone immediately hate you, but apparently you can.
Yeah, you can. And it's really sad that is what I was referring to when I said about people take this very instinctive polarized position and trying to get them out of it. I didn't get anywhere. I couldn't move anybody.
Didn't either. Yeah. I think I made it worse, if I'm being honest. I tried for about a month.
I probably made it worse.
Would it help if you pre-penned your question about whether uploading is a good idea with something like, we used to live outdoors, now we live indoors. Do you think it's okay to live longer? Yeah.
Yeah, I think posing the questions, medical interventions, especially you talk about, relative to memory and Alzheimer's, like people often do not find medical interventions problematic, and so when you then ease in with the idea of prosthetics and then advance piece by piece, I do wonder if that would change the conversation a little bit.
I think that goes back to what Randall said about memory safe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, start in the safe zone. Yeah.
And so, Angela, this brings me into I just had a question about, or just help understand the clarity of what you'll be focusing. So I understand that it's to see how your panelists, what can help bring them to understand and or accept whole brain emulation. Is this primarily focused on whether or not they accept that it is technologically feasible? Or are you also including things like whether or not they accept it as ethically acceptable, or like other more philosophical aspects, or is it like primarily can you convince or can you help someone understand that emulating a brain is possible? Like, is that the main focus, rather, and like the second, and like the ethicals and the philosophical aspects, are they secondary, or are you incorporating those in some way? Like, what is the primary focus here?
The primary focus is really on understanding how people feel about the possibility of ultimately mind uploading. So that's the goal. I'm not there to convince them or change their mind from the point of view of trying to get them to believe something they're uncomfortable with. I want to explore how comfortable they are and where I can take them on the journey. I suspect, from what I've seen so far, it's not a case of being able to rank and prioritize factors, and I'm doing a qualitative study. I think all of the different pieces of the jigsaw are going to come in. You're going to get ethical, you're going to get religious, you're going to get philosophical. You're going to get every kind of different discussion, because that's just the way people are. And depending on how that pans out, then that might mean that I have to change some of the ways I look at it or some of the journey. But the trick is really to go in with an open mind and see what people say and understand it, process it, and decide where you take the journey. And I know this is a really alien concept to a lot of people who've done quantitative work, to a lot of people who do a very traditional PhD trajectory, that I can literally be flexible. And that is quite a weird thing.
And as we discussed yesterday, it's not just that you're going to get the whole gamut of possible reasons why people object or don't understand. You're also going to get the moving goalposts problem, that because they are emotionally invested in one particular answer, that they might keep on coming up with new reasons that just push the problem further down the road. Yeah.
But then at least if we understand, I mean, I know we've already talked about a lot of this, but if we understand those reasons a bit better and where they come from, we've got more of a chance of trying to find a way to talk to people about it in a way they might accept. I'm sure there will be some people that will not move up that journey. And that is a finding in itself. And the reasons why they won't change their beliefs and their attitudes, again, is useful to know. I might not be able to unpick all of it. I think there are some things, as Randall says, you just get stuck in this circular loop and people will just repeat the same thing. But by doing a longitudinal panel, it gives me, I think, the best chance of trying to work with people and try and build a story rather than talking to them once. They get stuck in a loop. Doesn't matter how you encourage them to look at it from a different perspective, they just can't or they won't. This is why the journey, I think.
This might be a little bit unrelated, but I thought it might be helpful. It may work better if you describe brain emulation as not making you immortal, because you're not, as long as your servers are running. So at least is a maximum as the lifetime of the universe, right? So, I'm not sure if that's relevant or not, but I just realized that.
It's interesting.
Well,
yeah,
I've been involved with people who are trying to promote life extension, and they've found that if they start talking about immortality, it's generally very counterproductive.
Yeah.
It basically makes you look like a kook or some kind of cultist. So yeah, I would advise against using the immortality word. It's not scientific either, as you pointed out.
sorry, that might have been completely irrelevant, but I just thought I should mention that.
No, it's an important point, because you do hear people throwing out that term. I don't understand why, but people do use that term.
Go ahead, Ken.
So I was wondering how much. I was just thinking about most of the people will have, as you said at the beginning of your talk, will have come to this from a science fiction perspective, and I'm thinking about all the incredible damage to the understanding of the concept that I think I'm the only person that has not seen Black Mirror. So I think I have to. I haven't seen it yet. Okay, I've seen Upload. I've seen other things, but at some level there is a the vast majority is so simplistic.
Yeah.
That it's simplistic in two ways. Simplistic in the sense that you put a crudely designed helmet on your head with wires sticking out, and now you're uploaded into a computer. And two, I think a lot of the science fiction probably has you put a crudely designed helmet in your head, and you get uploaded to the computer, and somehow that moves your mind, copying your mind. And so both of those concepts have to almost be. Again, I'm trying to put it back in the format of if we were comparing this to some other technology, like Star Trek transporters. Okay, yes. You should not be able to convince anybody that Star Trek transporters are possible anytime. Period. Okay, there is no science behind it, and it would be interesting to even just rank. It's like, here are the things that are in science fiction. Which of those do you think are going to happen and when before which others? It might be that mind uploading comes after transporters in some people's minds. But just in space travel as well, it's like, there's this original conception. I don't know if you go back into really deep science fiction before rockets, that there was probably something more like a balloon analogy where you're floating off into space, and so there's anti-gravity, and that's what's going to happen, and getting people to give up those simplistic attitudes. It's almost like you have to convince them that it's not possible first before you can drag them all the way to it is possible. It's in spades, right? It's like all the movies are, somebody gets frozen and they just get rewarmed and they come back. And it's like you have to get rid of the simplistic arguments before you could even get to the yes, it is plausible, but very, very difficult. I'm just wondering how you might explore that.
Just tacking quickly on there, I think that it's actually safe to say that a large percentage of the people who are currently stored at Alcor went there with the belief that they would eventually just be warmed up and back in their body.
Sorry.
To a degree, right? They don't realize that they probably have to be completely reconstructed, right?
I would be curious to know the answer to that. I have no idea.
I think there's two things, Ken, that are really interesting. The first thing is, as a researcher trying to recruit willing participants, the fact that they know what mind loading is or they're familiar with it is great because people get all excited. However, as you've just alluded to, the bad side of that is that almost everything they think is probably wildly wrong. And that's sort of why we had a rethink and we've gone back to this safe approach. I'm not going to be able to unpick and tackle every single horrible misconception that people have, but if I can put them in a safe, relevant, meaningful place, I've got a better chance, I think, of trying to move further forward. I think it's going to be quite challenging, but I'm much more comfortable now with the platform I've got, because I know they're going to come at it with all sorts of weird stuff, and we're going to have a bit of time, just getting the weird stuff out there and having a bit of a chat about it. But then I should be able to anchor them slightly more and start talking about this idea of memory. And as Randall said, memory is safer. I'm not trying to dismiss the fact that I want to get to the point of mind uploading, but I've got to try and start them somewhere where I've got some hope of them actually bedding in and not just going, oh, no, but actually starting to think about it, basically.
So Michael
Just-
or Anita or Angela, I know that we have, just to mention that we have been, see, it's been, what has it been, an hour and a half, maybe a little bit more right now. So, so we're over time. Not that that's a problem, and we can keep going. Just to anyone who feels like they're, hanging around because they feel like it would be weird to be seen leaving. We've had our time, so if you have to go, go.
Well, just a comment to build off what Ken just said. I think we do owe it to explain to people at some point the science, because in order to do this ethically, you will need informed consent.
Yes, exactly.
That's the direction that Ken has been pushing. I know, is to have this available as a medical option with fully informed understanding and consent of the procedures involved. So, yeah, that's. I just want to mention that it is important to explain what this actually is and how it contrasts from what they may have seen in science fiction.
Yes, don't worry. Anything that I show people in terms of a concept.
And I think the
between
cryonics.
non-particle.
My impression is the cryonics companies do this now. I mean, they, but I don't know if in the past they've always did that very well.
Well, I mean, I was kind of curious if comes into this at all. I had assumed that this is pretty much separate. I mean, people's attitudes toward mind uploading do not necessarily have anything to do with preservation, let's say. I think they're probably related, but I think that they could certainly be disentangled at the start. In the same way that people, if you were to ask, are we going to have colonies on Mars? Most people would say yes. And if you said, are you going to live in a colony on Mars? Most people would say no. And that's kind of like the logical way of addressing this. And I would suspect that, if you open up with a question like that, and it's kind of is the human race eventually going to figure out the underpinnings of the mind in the physical brain, so that who knows how many millions of years in the future that we will be able to simulate those mental computations on a computer, and you would have the same conscious experience, etc. I think a lot of people would just say, because there's not a lot of wiggle room there, right? They would have to be pontificating on something a million years from now. They would have to be pontificating on a fundamental lack of ability of science and human ingenuity to get somewhere. Whereas if you were to say, do you think we're going to get to this within the next, within your lifetime, then you get kind of anybody who says, without a whole lot of caveat, probably doesn't understand the situation. Doesn't understand how difficult it is. And then you might want to ask, so how many neurons do you think there are in the brain? And if they come up with the number that's like a few thousand, they're probably not that thought
So
up.
how many radios are in your brain to communicate? See, but actually, it's funny that you make that distinction, and you said it's kind of like asking, are you going to be on Mars, or are we ever going to be on Mars? Because I felt like comparing brain preservation and the topic of mind uploading is more like asking, are we ever going to have a human colony on Mars? And do you think there will ever be rockets that can take humans to Mars? sort of like that. So in that sense, it feels like if we're ever going to really talk to people about the science of mind and body, because you have to get them there, right? You have to talk to them in terms that they get them there. That's something that Dan brought up. Then brain preservation is closely related to that as a topic, right?
Well, I'm just going from actually, I think I'm going from the perspective of what my neuroscience colleagues usually when they jump out of the conversation, because I think in the neuroscience colleagues, if you frame it as an abstract academic type of question about scientific limitations, then there's almost no pushback. If there's any type of real term application, then they freak out. Their hair sets on fire, and they pull out the blanket.
Yeah, I get it. I think Thomas posted another question. Was it? Oh, that's for me and for Ken. How long will it? 67.5 years exactly from 2230. I'm just kidding. I don't know. Years. I try not to answer that question anymore. Actually, I find it very counterproductive. Although we like to have some estimates in mind, and so that's why I usually give answers like, I would be phenomenally surprised, astounded, and will eat several hats if it happens within 20 years. But I would be equally surprised and kind of disillusioned if humanity and our rate of science can become so slow that we can't get it done in 100. At least for the first whole brain emulation of something the size of a human brain. So I put it in those kind of brackets, where I basically give my brackets of where I would be extraordinarily surprised to the point of disbelief or disappointment.
Sorry, that might not have been relevant. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just to add to this. I think one of the key things that goes into that question is whether there is a really fundamental scientific thing that we need to understand about the brain that we have no clue about right now that has to be uncovered. If for example, so the assumption is that that we are pretty much understanding that neurons are the way that most things are happening, that there's synaptic communication, that there's firing of neurons, ion channels, et cetera, and we don't know how all of that comes together to do all these tasks, although we're getting better and better and better all the time. But we certainly don't know how all of those come together to give a whole conscious, intelligent mind like a human being. But there are a lot of people, including some definitely, who think that there might be something really radical that we're not getting. That standard is not just it's not just those neural computations, but it's something else. Yeah. And I think, depending upon what side of that question that you come down on, you will have a radically different timeline.
That's true. At that point, it can almost be all bets are off, right? Because if it's really, we need to figure out how to make human soul connectors or something like that, then it's going to be a problem. And, it could be if there is something missing, which I don't see the evidence for that right now. So I'm not on that side, actually. I'm on the other side of it. But if there were a really radically missing piece of understanding, it could be something as fundamental as, back in the day when people thought that they could probably soon solve all the questions about physics using just Newtonian mechanics. and they completely missed out on all that other stuff that came up and was actually way more interesting and complicated. So if that's the case, then yeah, all bets are off. Could take a long time.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And this is one of those things in the taxonomy that might, people may, once you get people to really think about this topic, if they could really crystallize what their, what side they are on particular issues like that, it might help understand everything.
Yeah. One comment on when you may have already thought of this, but when you survey the experts, it's definitely important to get some idea of uncertainty. So a lot of times when people are asking about AI timelines, like they will phrase a question like, what is your 95% confidence interval for when we will have human level AI? And then people will say something like, well, between 2040 and 2100 or something. Because even experts are typically very uncertain on these things. So if you just get a single number, that's not really capturing the full range,
The only thing I would say is that in the Delphi technique, the aim is consensus. So actually what you'd like to see is that all these people with vastly different views perhaps move slightly closer together. Whether that will happen, I don't know.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's sort of like some of the techniques used for crowdsourcing. There's a startup that's actually working on getting the wisdom of crowds using a similar technique. I forget the name of it. Another thing people look at is like prediction markets.
Yeah.
It's
a way to try to do that. Yeah. But I mean, there's of course the prediction market just by itself is just polling someone's current estimates, not doing that thing of trying to generate the consensus by putting more information in or answering questions or iteratively. I mean, it gets done organically.
Yeah, I mean, we couldn't do a prediction market for this because it would be so far out. Nobody's going to want to invest money on that kind of time scale. But I think those prediction markets can be quite powerful for forecasting. You could have a prediction market for something very near term, like maybe like when are we going to have an artificial hippocampus or something, but probably not for implementation.
I think Sergem has a question.
Yeah, it's interesting that whenever we mention mind uploading, immediately life extension and I guess like the individual pops up. But I guess there should also be it should also be emphasized how important it is from just like our total understanding of the brain, and like having that not only that, but our like computer architecture. We could build much better systems, much better AI systems just by knowing about it. So I think that should be emphasized more.
Definitely, and that ties back to this idea of trying to make it real. So, most people could imagine what it might mean if, you didn't forget things. That's the whole point of trying to have a platform that people can relate to.
I actually don't know who closes these meetings. If it's me, even though I'm not officially the journal club lead anymore, then I'll do it. I can do the one where we still have an open floor for questions. Going once, going twice. Sold. One journal club sold to whoever asked the last question. Yes, Sergem, it's yours. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining and for the wonderful and very informative questions, which I hope some of which are going to be useful to you as well, Angela, that you can take them back and do something with it. And we really, really look forward to seeing the updates as they come along, seeing what happens here.
No pressure then. No, it's cool.
And I don't remember. So, Anita, Michael, do we already know who the next presenter is?
We do not have one scheduled as of yet. And there was one question that I can answer from the YouTube chat is when will part 7 be of the workshop? That is going to be March 7th. Yeah, so I just wanted to make sure that that was answered because that was in the YouTube chat. But yeah, as far as the question of do we have a next presenter, we do not have one yet. So the floor is open for volunteers.
Okay, but we're also doing the thing where, I mean, we're not just asking the people who happen to be here, right? But just...
correct.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I still have one that I will be doing, but it is still on hold. Angela and why did I suddenly forget her name? Other A.
Anita, Alicia?
No. Amna. Sorry, Amna. Yes, they're helping me to finally get this one to fruition so that I can present it, because it's a bit more complicated than technical and full of things to present. But yeah, we need someone else in between, I think. Another journal club before that.
Yeah, will do.
Okay. Well, I'm going to sign off now. So, thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Angela.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Angela.